Hello and welcome to another episode of A Junior, a Senior and I. And the title keeps being a lie because again today I'm with two seniors. I'm joined by Stan and Lucian to discuss Ruby and maybe Rails. But before we do that, let's meet our guests. Lucian, could you introduce yourself in 3 sentences or less, please?
Yes, because I talk a lot, I will try to limit myself to 3 sentences. So I am the curator of a newsletter called Short Ruby, which is a kind of a visual newsletter about what is happening in Ruby world every week with screenshots and what people are discussing on social media and in articles and in other places. And I'm a senior Ruby developer. I started with Ruby, I think around 2006, 2007. I have been written Ruby since then. I did also a wide range of other related jobs to the developer, but at my core, I'm a senior Ruby developer. This is what I call myself.
What about you, Stan?
I'm a subscriber of Short Ruby, like so many others. But yeah, no, I started my developer career as a Ruby dev. Started with Ruby, fell in love with it. Was studying engineering at school and studying things like C and Java. And Ruby felt like a breeze, so I guess we'll talk about this today. I doubled down on that, went ahead and started to work with that. And one thing leading to another, I ended up being more on the CTO tech lead side than developer. And today, the irony of this podcast is I'm not developing anymore. And my present company does not even have any Ruby code base, but one small one that I managed to bring. But yeah, so essentially I've used Ruby, I've managed people using Ruby, and now I manage people not using Ruby. So I guess that's the slingshot that we have a look at.
Nice. I guess my first question is, why Ruby? Or in Stan's case, why not Ruby anymore?
If I start, why not Ruby? It's because as much as we love it, it's not the most widespread language in companies. And so essentially, at the time, the main code base we use is based on TypeScript. I mean, JavaScript and TypeScript. So that's the only reason, to be honest. But why I started with Ruby, it's because it felt quite easy to get to a point where we could have something live and just running. And it was, I mean, the feedback loop was amazing at that point. So that's why I personally get started is, yeah, the feedback loop was insane.
Insane as compared to Java, you said you studied, right?
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, maybe the comparison does not hold because it was during studies. And so I had very theoretical lessons about C, about, object-oriented programming, which we used with Java and everything. So maybe, those languages were held back by the academic kind of things, which was not really my scene. But anyway, that's how I got it started during weekends and weekdays. And that was actually my, how can I say that? The moment when you absolutely have to work on something and you do everything else that you can. So you clean your room, you do everything else. That was my thing. I was coding with Ruby and I was thinking it's not really leisure. So it's fine. And so that's how I got started.
Nice. What about you, Lucian? Why Ruby?
Yeah, so 2 things I might say here, very maybe random thoughts, but I will try to integrate them back. So one is I started learning Ruby after I was coding professionally, but as a junior back then with Python and PHP mostly. And I did study before that 2006, 2007 in my faculty, Java, C, and Prolog and some other languages. I finished computer science. But let's say professionally, my mainly job was writing some PHP and mostly Python. And then I discovered Ruby, being introduced to it by some colleagues with whom I'm still friends now. But I remember the feeling, and I shared in some speeches at some conferences about this. I remember this feeling that I got with Ruby, that was so crazy how it looked like and so different than the other languages, although being similar in some ways. But looking at the code in Ruby felt so, I don't like to use the word magic. It felt so different that in my mind, this is a phrase that I say, it's supposed to be illegal to be like that as a programming language, and then it clicked very quick with me. Ruby back then, I think it was Ruby 1.8.7. I remember this vividly. I don't know why. I remember the minor version of it, but no matter what, so it felt like this. Whew, finally, And so this is an emotional experience, right? It's I think different people have a very similar emotional experience with other programming languages. That does not make a programming language very specific or unique, because I think other people are having a similar thing with other programming languages. But then I want to say something, and this is the second part of my answer, that is specific about Ruby. So if you notice, no matter if people are writing good or bad about Ruby, you notice that they use some keywords there. And those keywords, I'm not talking about static versus dynamic, but those keywords are about elegance and beauty. And for me, Ruby, it's synonym with freedom and creativity in some ways, right? It bridges the gap between hard science, as I am an engineer at my core, with art in some ways. Because in Ruby, more than in other languages, and I'm doing a comparison, we talk about beautiful code. And Ruby offers tools for that in standard library. In the syntax, you have multiple ways to express something. And when I say multiple ways, not only as a structure, but also in the keywords, you can use if not or unless or things like this, and then an end conditional at the end and things like this. So we talk about not only good code, but also about beautiful code. And here is the last part. Beauty, it's in the realm of art, right? Beauty, it's a subjective thing in some ways. You can put some objective assessment of it. So this is why I think Ruby, it's in the middle of a programming language. So something that runs on computers. So it's more, to me, close to hard science, let's say. I'm not sure if hard science is a good name here, but also art. Thinking about this, and even the discussions that we have about, this Robocop rule I like, I don't like, and so on and so forth, still they are about, does it bring a nice looking, in some ways, Ruby? That of course goes into also, when we will talk about beautiful, we mostly talk about one attribute of this beautiful, that is being readable, very close to English language. To pseudocode, if you want to. So basically, I'm not sure, but in beginning of high school, I studied programming because I was at an IT classes. We started with pseudocode, with expressing some kind of algorithms in pseudocode. And I bet if I take my notes back then and with the very slightly changes, they might look like Ruby. Like with some slightly changes. And I also think it's fit for a junior in some ways, as we are not juniors here, but it can be fit to learn programming with it.
I'm going to put a pin on that because I know Stan has thoughts on that. I just want to dive into the art comment you just made before returning to, is Ruby beginner friendly or not? Does that idea of Ruby is described as elegant, described as beautiful, etc., and thus very subjective, make it so that Ruby code is really divergent between persons, because each other has a different version of what is beautiful, right? Like what I find beautiful or elegant or whatever, which are really subjective topics, are different than what Stan or you, Lucian, find beautiful, elegant, whatever the adjective you want to put. Is that a consequence of that, or you don't find that in the wild?
Yes, it is a consequence of that. I mean, if we will take aside Robocop, which I think brought very nice things into our Ruby world, and limited some big debates about very small stuff, let's say, not only the performance improvements about syntax, people can write different Ruby in different ways due to the expressiveness of the language, and this might make various code in the wild, let's say, look different. And even if you don't look individually, because I collaborated with quite some companies, but I don't know all the code. Even if you pass that, there are various styles that you can see in some Ruby books that are. I could mention here just two that are for me. Like one, it's Sandy Meth's way of writing OOP, which is not specific about the language, right? It's more about the shape of the objects. And another one that I like, Jeremy Evans' kind of way of writing Ruby code. It's still using the same standard syntax of Ruby, but different shapes can be out of those. But also is not 100% subjective, right? Because I think what I'm about to say is subjective, my subjective opinion, but I will try to make it a bit more general. I think if we take a pool of Ruby developers, we might agree that beauty, in this case, beautiful code, has a lot to do with readability and maintainability of that code. So it has a lot to do with, does the code look in a way that it's easy to be understood and changed after a while? And of course, like in beauty, this evolves with time, right? So for example, in Ruby, again, those years, let's say 2010, we wrote a lot of metaprogramming in Ruby, and we were thinking metaprogramming is what beautiful Ruby is in some ways, right? We are creating a lot of DSLs and metaprogramming, and doing that was, maybe not beauty, but this is nice in Ruby. But and if you look now it's a lot more voices are, you should not use it unless you really need it. My opinion is actually there are two types of, because the ecosystem is mature, there are two kinds of programming in Ruby, let's say. One is creating library code, gems, and so on and so forth, where metaprogramming is still there present, and where the code is a mix of maybe beauty and performance and creating a nice DSL, and application code or product code, let's say, where, of course, what beautiful code in this case, it's different. Not sure I answered the question.
You answered the question, and you gave us jumping out points. I don't know if, Stan, you have any thoughts on this beauty part.
I have thoughts on metaprogramming, but
let's go with the thoughts on metaprogramming then.
No, but just to share one bit on the beauty part, and it has something to do with the junior thing we're going to touch a bit later. I believe Ruby is kind of minimalistic in essence, and it looks like you have way less noise than other programming languages. And I think the consequence of that is it makes it more approachable by someone who's outside of the world of and wants to enter being a programmer, doing a bootcamp or this kind of stuff. Because essentially, as you said, you look at it, and in my opinion, and that's once again subjective, the first time you look at code, it's less daunting to look at a piece of Ruby than it is to look at a piece of Java or maybe even TypeScript if you have no idea what types are. And maybe we'll touch types later on. but yeah, and that has something to do with beauty, in my opinion, and it's kind of it makes it easier to approach from outside people. For the metaprogramming part, I think you summed up the context pretty nicely. I've always been on the side of product, and metaprogramming for a product, I don't believe it's something you should use. I'd rather have something more verbose than the next guy is going to be able to answer to understand. And I'm leaning so much towards that. It leads to disagreement within the team, especially with Pablo and Sanjeev, if you're listening. But no, but like you know what I mean. When I'm always leaning towards something more expressive than something clever, because essentially I consider myself as not being so clever, and so if I cannot understand a PR in an instant, I'm thinking, if a junior arrives on the code base, it's going to be hard. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to achieve here.
That's highly unfair, because I very seldom use metaprogramming, and most times it's like, I'm kind of forced here because of it happens, right? Sometimes you just have to because it happens, right? I do disagree a bit with both of you, I think, in the sense that, especially Lucian, you were saying that DSLs belongs in gems and libraries.
No. I was saying that you write code, just to clarify. I was saying the way you write code in gems and libraries, when you want, for example, to provide a nice DSL, might be better fit for metaprogramming than for, let's say, not metaprogramming, or I don't know how to say.
Gotcha. But the point I was trying to make is that I would argue that even on the product side, ultimately what we want to create is a DSL. We want our application to talk the language of our product, right? And have a domain-specific language where we say like, okay, student.study, and then we know that it's going to study and we don't care about anything else. That's more what I meant. And I think that if in the internals of product code, to be able to write that DSL for your specific domain, metaprogramming can be useful. It's probably the last tool I try to reach because it's dangerous and it's going to allow me to unpin that beginner-friendly part that Stan is itching to talk about, because metaprogramming is dangerous, but I think it does have a place also on product side of coding.
So let me say a hot take here. In this, just I worked as consultant, let's say, or freelancer with many code bases and saw them in different shapes. And this is just a disclaimer. And I have, of course, personal opinions, but I saw code bases working in very different ways. No matter any principle that we might say, we can find code bases that are working beautifully with or without metaprogramming, with or without, right? It's like this. But my hot take is the following. When I see a code base that has a very nice domain language implemented, either with DSL or just good object names and method names and good OOP due to having a design of the language, it's amazing, right? But I will take any day, how to say, I don't want to say a service-oriented code base, but a code base that has big methods that are called process or whatever, over one code base that is half modeled as domain and uses DSLs, but the names and the things don't fit there, because it creates a confusion. It creates a layer on top of the programming language with some names if they don't match properly, right? And of course, that takes effort.
Yeah, I think I see what you mean, in the sense that if you can't trust that the domain-specific language of that application is doing what it does,
yeah, I will not go there.
Down.
Or when creating an application, if you think you don't have the time to put in for good names and to have a partner to understand the domain language or the business domain, because sometimes, like I don't know, if I would write on the web app for a domain that I don't know, I need to have a counterpart in the business or product that can help me with naming stuff, right? If you don't have that, then I tend toward more simplicity and locality. Like I'm okay with bigger objects because I want things to be there and bypass some of the principles that we discuss, and even say, okay, let's name something very obvious. If we don't have a better name, and not create a specific DSL for this, let's just call it as an object and see how we get there. But I 100% agree. The beautiful, again, using beautiful, right? Beautiful Ruby apps are the ones where you have this mix of DSL with object-oriented that creates a very powerful language on top of Ruby that you can use. That I think it's one of the things why I think Ruby it still wins in other chapters than other languages, including the ones that are having extra syntax for types and so on, because you can have these beautiful DSLs with beautiful objects.
I'm going to now pin the type part and unpin the beginner part. Stan, Ruby is easy for beginners. Thoughts?
I've said it right before. I think it's very approachable. I think it's very dangerous at the same time. And I believe I'm projecting a lot the way I was, the kind of person I was when I entered this language. I couldn't be bothered to dive too much into things during those years when I was a teenager. So essentially for me, it was extremely dangerous because I was reading something and not really trying to understand what it actually was. And when you see for the first time a line which is calling a method with a bunch of arguments, named, unnamed, and so on, yeah, you can use that and have some smart copy pasting. But the issue is, I believe it's extremely hard for me at least, to not just use it as it is and not try to understand. And so at the end of the day, I think even though, Java was extremely noisy in comparison. Just having to define and to understand, why do I have access to that? Why not? Like, I have something in mind, which is something I cherish so much in Ruby as attribute accessors. Having to define them, such a pain. Having to understand that it exists and Ruby does it for you, extremely important. And so that's the kind of level I'm talking about, is if you don't dive into the language, and we'll talk about Rails eventually, and it's this times 10 for me. If you don't dive into it and have the curiosity to try to understand deeply how it works and what it does, I think it's dangerous. And so when I'm saying I don't think it's good for juniors, I'm saying it's not good for juniors like the junior I was, because I couldn't be bothered to dive into things too much. If you are extremely curious and if you need to understand, like once again, Sanjeev comes into the podcast. For Sanjeev, I'm sure it was okay, because the guy has like this thing about understanding everything he's touching. Different kind of thing for different people, I believe.
What about you, Lucian? Do you think in the same lines than Stan, or do you think it's a more beginner friendly?
Yeah, I would say I agree that it feels not to be beginner friendly, but I think the causes of it are or maybe I think differently about the causes. So I do agree. It feels overwhelming for a beginner from multiple perspectives. One is the following. We in Ruby, if you look at the seniority of people, the majority are senior. That's the reality of our, let's say, community, right? And through me doing the short Ruby, I noticed on social media or Reddit or whatever, juniors coming and posting, writing a small article or posting a code, and then 10 seniors jumping on and totally destroying everything that person put there in a good way from the senior part, saying you should not do that and not do that and never use that and always use it like this and so on, which is a learning. Like those people, I don't want to sound judgy, those people that review and share their opinion in public or as comment, they put time. So a senior put time to read that and provide feedback. But also it felt to me as high bar for a junior to achieve that from the beginning, right? It's like a junior might have read, I don't know, any beginner documentation and wrote a little bit. They don't have the full knowledge of this is how actually this works and so on and so forth, right? That this is one. So from this point, we have a very high bar for a junior to be in the community in some ways. It's an unspoken one. This is one. Second, there is a difference between now and then, let's say, one that Ruby was very enthusiastically received by the community, but did not have so much documentation as a language, as newer languages that we have maybe. And you see it in, again, 2007, 2008, 2009, something like this, whatever. Those years, I don't want to pinpoint because I don't remember. A lot of blogs and videos which were kind of sharing in kind of documentation like content about Ruby, how to use that, how to use that, how to do that, how to do that. But now we have better documentation about this, even the better than back then, the normal documentation. So from this point, I think Ruby is much more approachable than it was back then, but it's in another kind of competition with other languages now than it was back then, right? This is one. And I do agree 100% with Stan that once you get past the initial pseudocode-like thing that you can easily type something with Ruby and probably it works, you need to have the time to deep dive into stuff when you want to achieve a high level of complexity or simplicity, no matter how you name the other side of the coin of what you're creating, to deep dive into how it works and to understand. Like, for example, I even now read a lot in Ruby Backtracker about decisions about various stuff that are in the language. And reading those makes you understand why something is in a way. And if you don't have that time, I do agree that you might go into some roadblocks. And combine this with the seniority, there are not many people who are accepting of a junior from the perspective of enthusiasm as it was when I joined. When I joined, I could have wrote a very stupid Ruby code, that stupid by, I don't know, standards of performance or, I don't know, gotchas, exceptions, and so on. And still someone might have been enthusiastic. Oh, you did good this one. Let me shape it into stuff. Now the message is, oh my God, never do that. You know, like this is because we expect a lot.
Stan, I think you wanted to react.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the issue with how the language is permissive, how much it is permissive, that's what you were describing, and I can't agree more with that. It's, I should be doing like this, but it works the way I've done it, so why? And then you enter a conversation of, okay, yeah, and that's the I think the art aspect, the subjectivity aspect, it's a double-edged sword, and that's the second part. Is you can do a lot of different stuff, and the language enables you to do that, and then someone says, hey, that's not how you should be doing that. That's extremely counterintuitive in my opinion. And yeah, as you were saying, like it kind of breaks your enthusiasm at that point. But then it's, at the end of the day, that's the mark of a mature ecosystem as well. Like we've been doing that for ages. We experience all together as a community, and this way doesn't work so well. And so we lean toward this one. But as you were saying, like for newcomers, yeah, you have a lot of backlog to get into before putting things perfect, as the community would say.
If I want to just add a very quick thing here, like if we compare it with JavaScript, let's say, not the language but community wise. So because Ruby, it's a smaller community than JavaScript, and we might know a bunch of us between us in some ways, right? Like where people are. A lot of the community is there. If you are a junior and you might want to experiment, let's say, with Ruby, or a senior in a different way than what the normal people are calling idiomatic Ruby, okay, you fail the backslash because it's like you're competing with people who are senior. They want not an easier, a simplified code, like kind of, right, a more simplified thing, because they know what a complex code can create in a big production web app, something like this. But because the community is small, the chances to find a group of people that are more similar with you and more accepting, it's smaller, right? While in JavaScript, you can go, and because the community is big, you can always find a group of people with whom you can develop things in a certain way to have that initial enthusiasm. And maybe you will relearn some lessons on the way, right? Like you might learn after a while that, oh, actually this does not work. But at least someone was there with you in this road, and without breaking. Just to share an example, I had, it's a bit personal, but just to share it. I had not a crusade, but I put an intention 2 years ago, I think, to share more about the new addition to Ruby that are since 2017, I think. Like endless method, pattern matching, this kind of things, number params, and so on. And I started sharing about these things in more serious ways at conference or online and so on. And they are part of the syntax language, but it's a hard way to find, to talk about them, because as seniors, again, we want a comfortable place for our production app. And of course, the more you have an older production app that is reliable and works well, the less you are inclined to adopt something new because it might break. That's the reality. It's a real thing, right? It's a real thing. So it's hard to experiment. And this is also, I think, and we're still at why Ruby, but it's a danger, I think, and I share this opinion. We don't like to experiment more with the language because we love the current Ruby, but this might actually break its future. Because we have to be open to experiment with it in strange ways. Maybe not in the production, maybe in a side project, maybe, but we have to experiment in order for it to evolve.
I'm sensing here like a tension between, we're describing Ruby as flexible. It lets you like do mistakes and do the same thing in 3 different ways, etc. But then the community or the seniors or people who are used to writing Ruby will tell you, no. So there is on this side the flexibility of the language per se, and the inflexibility of the community. Is that something that...
That's it. It's both of them are, are real, not judging them. They are both coming from, from good experience. So we have a set of good practices that the community learned through some experimentation in the past, and we learn doing it this way will break stuff, will not help you in the future. So those are good best practices. But also us should allow us to experiment in other parts with it, because the language, the community needs to evolve. I don't know in which direction. I bet Mats of course has some visions about it, but introducing a new syntax, the only way to know if that works is to use it in the beginning in a passion hobby project, but also in production apps. Because answering the question, is pattern matching good? We don't know yet. There are very little serious code bases that embrace pattern matching as main thing in cases where it is, right? So we don't know how that works for real. So we keep it there. The same with endless method or other stuff, right? It's like a good example, a better example, it's the data object that we have, which is a kind of immutable data object, value object that people were using struct before, and it actually, the code is very similar with struct, which is very nice, but still we're debating about it, let's say in various cases, to use it or not, why to use this new thing. And without putting it there, you cannot answer. It's the same with the article that we're discussing in our before starting here, right? You have to use seriously a thing to be able to have the taste of it and have a good opinion about that.
Okay, as you said before, we were still in the why Ruby, so I'm gonna try to
please
break up from the first subject.
We can have an episode only about why Ruby.
At some point, I don't know if it was Stan or Lucian, you mentioned types. Do you guys want to dive into types a little bit, or we know we do dynamic typing, it's fine. Let's gloss on whatever you guys want.
I mean, if by any chance we have some JavaScript friend that they're gonna listen to this podcast and we say types don't exist and we put blindfolds on us, they might scream. But at the end of the day, like everything, it depends. Obviously, once again, I believe we'll talk about Rails. Is Rails the right framework to do everything? No. Is having the option to use types or no a good thing? I believe it is. For some projects, I couldn't be bothered to use types. For some others, yeah, I could see it happening. My main gripe with it is what I very much like in Ruby and in Rails is there is a way to do things. You can do whatever you want, but there is a path, and you can, if you follow it, you know you'll be good, right? There is experimentation, as Lucian said, and it's very important. But depending on the project, like on my day-to-day job, to be honest, I treat it as a tool, and I want the tool to work as expected. And so for types, I want the community to being able to express clearly, if you use types, this is the way. I don't want to go into, should I use sorbet? Should I put tapioca with it? Should I put whatever? Like, give me something that works. That's my take with types. But as Lucian said, and it's very interesting what you've said at the end, is to know if someone is good for you or not, you have to try it, and not try it just as a hobby, but like put it in production and see how it behaves. I'm in the stage where I want to do that with types, but I'm at a loss. And so that's my way of answering your question with and saying at the same time, yeah, I don't know.
Yes. So I am. Let's start with something like this. I am on my second year of working in a quite big, I would say, but bigger than a hobby project for sure. A very nice application, where I'm using sorbet. This is the second year, going on the third year doing that. And when I first joined that code base and seeing sorbet, I was on the camp, no types, dynamically till the end. I could have made a t-shirt with it. But seeing, like, as Stan said, that this is what I believe this. Seeing it in practice, seeing what can bring and how, made me realize that, again, while we might have strong opinions about some stuff, seeing them work makes me be more accepting with it. Actually, I think there are cases where you want sorbet, and those cases are a mix of technical stuff and culture stuff. depends on what kind of team do you want to have writing Ruby, how much people are coming and going in various parts of the code base, and how big the domain of your code base is. Even if it's Rails, no matter what kind of code base, a Ruby one, right?
If it's two guys in a garage, like two friends, like
maybe
two
you don't.
seniors,
you have everything. But if the code base is big, and more so you have people coming and going either in the code base in the company or moving between teams, so you want these flexible T-shaped kind of teams that someone knows better something but can work in all the places and so on. I think there is a case for types, and there is a case for types how Ruby is doing it, which I don't know very well the TypeScript types, but reading about it, it seems a pretty powerful typing system. Maybe Ruby does not have that, because I don't know the other part, right? I'm saying maybe it's a bit more, not shallow, but how to say, maybe it's a bit more not that complex. But even so, I think this is a good case that you can adopt something without going fully into the complexity of types, because types are a solution to some things, but they are also technology that you will now put in your code base, have to maintain, and you will add to your development speed in one way or another. So, and basically for me, it's you want to pay this price to solve some culture or organizational stuff, and to solve some maintainability stuff, and maybe hoping to allow you to quickly pay technical debt in the future. So there are various reasons. And if I can pitch, I would say I will pitch Sorbet, and I'm one of the people that likes Sorbet syntax because it is Ruby syntax. And I know a lot of people are saying that, but when you learn types, you learn another language, another programming language if you want to. It's another language that you have to learn to express your thoughts. So now when you solve a problem, you have to express that problem in the types and in the business logic in two ways, right? With Sorbet, because it's Ruby code, exactly Ruby code. You don't have to learn a syntax. Still, you have to learn a grammar, right? A way of expression, DSL. But it's a syntax. You can put a type from Sorbet in a constant in Ruby, right? You can put it in a normal Ruby stuff with it, which I found amazing. But also the native ones are good. So I think we are even if the community says maybe not, I think I'm seeing more experimentation with this. There are companies which are using types in their production big code bases, and if the entire, let's say, if the programming, because it's like cycles, right? Before it was cycles with the programming languages, right? Now we are. When I say we as the global IT community, we seem to be again in love with types in some ways, as a general feeling. I'm not saying about Ruby, right? But we were also in love with types before, and then dynamically type or no types languages came, and we were saying, oh my God, this is freeing us from other stuff, and now we're back there. So, and I think in Ruby goes with the flow, even if Ruby wants to be different, it's still on the same ride. So yeah, I'm not against types. This is what I wanted to say with this big thing, and I see it working in some stuff and can help you with some things that can make things easier, like refactoring. It's a big one.
So basically, types, why not?
My synthesis is it depends on the code base and on the team, as Lucian really well said. Because at the end of the day, if it's two senior people in a room constantly overlooking each other's shoulder, working in pair, and they have the entire context in their head, I mean, don't bother.
That's what I meant with the why not, in the sense that if you feel you need it, go ahead. It's fine.
I can give you one more case that I started doing about types. So another case is and it's a good case now even with LLMs, although I don't plan to go into this subject. But let's say we are in a period where each one of us will create more and more gems in Ruby. Here is another case for types. So it helps you maintain multiple gems where you don't actively maintain them, right? So let's say I'm writing a gem on January. I consider it pretty finished, or whatever. It's a niche one that solves something specifically. And then I go use it. And then I write another one and another one. And I come in August to do a small change on the gem from January. having types there helps you a lot with refactoring and small changes, and you don't have to keep in your head how was the structure that was moving here be like. You know that you can quickly add something and it will break the static analysis if you did something very bad about it.
Sure.
This could be a case to help you maintain things that you are not actively working on them every day.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like they have types, static typing has its uses, dynamic has its uses. Use whatever you need. We made it almost 45 minutes without talking about the elephant in the room. Well, Stan mentioned the elephant in the room a couple of times. Rails. Rails is a big part of the Ruby ecosystem. Like most big apps in production that use Ruby and are successful commercially use Rails, right? Or their flavor of Rails in any case. What are your thoughts on using Rails? I feel like it kind of augments everything about Ruby, like the danger, the elegance, etc., etc. Are you in that same camp, or?
Let me start because maybe I will say something and Stan can react. A couple of thoughts. I think Rails, it's a good addition to Ruby, let's say, because it comes with this convention over configuration that, because we talk about the flexibility of Ruby, we kind of need it when you want to go bigger scale and bigger teams and collaborating to do a web app, which already has a lot of moving pieces that are not even specific to Ruby. You are in a browser, you do requests over internet, they might time out, they might do a lot of stuff, right? So you are already in a complex environment, this web, which is also beautiful, but also complex. And you want to have more standard ways of doing stuff, right? And the amazing thing about the Rails is that you can write your business logic having all this context compressed there before your first line of code that handles payment. You don't have to write custom code about session management, about whatever browser stuff, right? It comes right to you and you can directly use what you need, that param in that specific way, let's say. So I think it fits. It's a good addition to Ruby. Actually, I think it's a part of the success of Ruby. Rails. Maybe maybe Rails is the reason why Ruby was adopted on large scale, let's say, by people who adopted it and successful. It also now back in 2024, 2025, I really like this no build stuff. It's a great way to go back. And other people said that. I'm quoting, I don't know, various people, because doing the Show Ruby newsletter, I read a lot of what other people are saying, so I might quote someone. But it's a great way, and I in my personal projects, I'm only doing them no build, nothing else. All my personal side projects are no build, because it's very fast deployment and is the direction that we go. Maybe we are not there 100%. Maybe we still need building tools now, but the browser are pretty powerful on what they can do, and they are becoming more powerful. And I think Rails with this, it's riding back this wave that might be the future. Maybe not, but Rails always made these bets. If you remember with REST and other stuff, like Rails made these bets about the future that so far paid off, and this might also be one of them. I'm very enthusiastic about it. I really hope this will catch more.
Yeah, I really like the direction they've been taking in the last, I would say 2 versions, which is, okay, let's simplify not just the MVC, not just this kind of the ORM or whatever, but let's simplify what comes with hosting a database, hosting an actual web application that's gonna serve customers. I can't agree more with you on that, Lucian. Rails 8, for that matter, I think it's a culmination of the actual vision I had for Rails. I mean, not the one I had for Rails, but the one that was, I believe, shared for the last few years, which is it can be a true monolith with very few compromises in terms of front end, in terms of hosting, in terms of everything around, right? And yeah, Rails 5 with a Webpacker. Yeah, I mean, if you never touch Webpack in your life, good luck with Webpacker, and see you in a year when you're done configuring it. But now, like, yeah, I mean, So I shared in my intro that we have one very tiny Rails application in my company, and I whipped it in a matter of minutes, and it was crazy. The last Rails new I did was Rails 6 a couple of years back. So Rails 8 was completely different. The time to production from the idea to the time it was live with something, I mean, not 100% tested, but with a decent test coverage, it's a matter of hours, and it was insanely fast, in my opinion. So the beauty of it comes from, as I was saying, the combination of the vision, which is simplicity as its core, front end, back end, DevOps, everything is in it. Everything just works, and that's, I mean, what can what can you ask for more?
You both mentioned simplicity and conventional over configuration, and there is the Rails way, right? Do you write Rails the Rails way, or do you write Rails your way? Because typically in the wild, you will find services in most Rails code bases. That's not the Rails way. In most Rails code bases, you'll also find that concerns are not that much used to encapsulate information, but that's not the Rails way, right? So how do you reconcile that dichotomy of Rails is simplicity and there is this Rails way, but in most places, they do Rails their way?
I think it has to go to do with what we discussed about the language earlier, right? If I take a step back, I said earlier that maybe Rails is not the best framework. I mean, not maybe, it is not the best framework for everything. But if you're starting a small SaaS company, which essentially handles forms, I mean, I would argue that Basecamp is a bunch of forms with some nice way to display the data. And most of the SaaS I've worked on are essentially the same, except the company we worked at, Pablo, sends a lot of emails. But that's about it. If you're doing that, it's fantastic. But at the end of the day, you still encountered some issues back in the days with, and I think it has something to do with the fact that we're not as good as maybe, or maybe not as aligned, but I'm always struggling to have slim models, and the way I work with that, the way I patch it's very in a not in a good way, I believe, is I put it in services. So it's more like a trade-off I do, which is, okay, yeah, I'm fine with services. It's easy enough. And my only argument for services is it's extremely easy to test, which I like. But I think it stems from the fact that I'm not putting in the effort to actually refactor the code base as it maybe should if we were doing it the Rails way. I don't know, Lucian, if you have a more like a in-depth arguments.
I again work with code bases that are Railsway and code bases that are so departed than Railsway that you can call them a different framework in some ways, right? My idea about this is the following. I think it's okay, no matter if you are going Railsway or not Railsway. It matters more what I think. I liked a presentation that Jean Boussier, I hope I pronounce well his name, last year at Euruco. He said something about owning the full stack of what you're developing. Like if you are using a gem and you find a bug, you should fix it. And that's part of your job at the current company to propose a PR there. And I think it's the same here about non-Rails way. So if you're using it in a non-Rails way, whatever we name that, if you own it and if you are, if you don't complain when Rails is doing something different because you want to own it, like that's the choice, it's fine. I think where the tension is when it's when different groups of people are defining first what Rails way or not Rails way means, and then expect the framework to be all that, and the framework cannot be all that, no matter who is leading it and how, right? It cannot be all the things that it can be. This is one thing. And the second thing, I think, but this is just, again, an assumption that is wild, is not a study, nothing. But I think if there are people who have very good reasons for writing something in not a Rails way, but they still like the Rails and capsule around that, right? Like for example, I'm working with an API written in Rails with a grape API using sorbet and Packware. That's how this app looks like, right? So that's not Rails way by. It's so different, right? You can, but it is like this because it's doing a lot of stuff that are not a simple CRUD thing. It's connecting to various services in various ways. It even has Apache Kafka. So it does a lot of stuff, being still a monolith in some ways. So there are cases where people want to use Rails in some ways, but their needs are very different than a normal web app, and go there. But the second part, in cases where people are still doing a web app, like a more crude one, I think the reason to not go the Rails way, most of the time, it's a combination of two things. One is naming and speed of development. Because actually, it's very easy to reach for a service and call that method call because you don't have a better name for it, nor do you have a counterpart to discuss and ping pong ideas about the name of that object and how it should be. And actually, my notice is that we are spending, when I say we, maybe it's just me or whatever the places I've been, we are spending less time doing code design, as in Sandy Metz design, talking about what this object should be and what interfaces it should have, and talk about what is the development experience if someone else is consuming this, right? And maybe that's the direction. I'm not trying to judge it in some ways, but if you don't do that and you don't have a good name, it's hard to make it the Rails app not have services or objects that are helpers or modules that are just having a function that is not part of an object, but you need it there.
I mean, Rails way or not, it's I don't. At the end of the day, like many things, it's not binary. It's a range, and most of the time, I mean, once again, talking about my personal experience, so obviously very subjective. I try to stay as much as possible in the Rails way, except for services, as we've talked. And I believe it's a good enough trade-off for what it brings to what it costs. And what it costs is, the way I see it, and so I'm in a specific position here. I'm not really talking about the code base, but more about building teams. The way I see it, the biggest cost is how much time it's going to take a newcomer to be, on par with the code base. And it's something that's so easy with Rails compared to, a JavaScript ecosystem. Even though we use Nest and Next, but Nest is very strange on some aspects, for me at least. But anyway, I'm diverging. But for Rails, that's the biggest selling point to build a team with Rails is you're going to hire the next person and she's going to be able to be on par with Rails. And in a matter of weeks, she'll be pushing to prod. And so I'm always trying to be extremely wary about diverging from what we've been calling the Rails way. And so most of the time, at least in the past, I was recruiting people and they were, okay, we use Rails. So if you're a junior or if you're coming from another language, you read this. And this was the Rails tutorial by Michael Hartzell. And then you read those 4 articles about services and you're done. You know how to navigate the code base. Then it's only a matter of being onboarded on the business. And as someone who recruits and try to retain people in teams, wow, the value of that is extremely high.
So I want to say 2 things here. One, I think consistency, it's actually what we are after when we say Railsway or not. I think more important than choosing Railsway or not Railsway is try to stick with the choice and be consistent with that. That I think beats.
Yeah, but not consistent just in your company, across an entire community. And that's the beauty of it.
Yes. Of course, the more you are close to Railsway, then the more you find consistency in the community. This is one. But the second thing about Rails, that is, I think it has many specific things, and I have worked with Sinatra production-wise, doing services, so also outside Rails. But what I want to say about Rails, something that is not mentioned, but it's so powerful. It's Rails console in production. Like having a customer tell you that they have a problem, and your ability to log in via whatever Kubernetes, no, it doesn't matter what you log in. Having a Rails console there, and with the power of Ruby, right? That you can, if you want, swipe a method of an object in a flow and put yours to debug it there. It's a powerful for the business, I would say, not only for developer. It's so powerful that I think it's a hidden superpower of Rails that, I don't know, we fail to mention at business level and developer level.
We take it for granted, and we should not. It's insane. I've been having an issue in production lately at my current company. It was like, yeah, just whip out a console. Say, what do you mean? And so they open the database, say, no, guys, like in the database, you don't have your ORM, you don't have your context. What are you doing? Oh, but we don't have that. What?
Yeah, it's true that we take it for granted, and it's a superpower.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And it's a superpower, again, also I want to make here the pitch for business perspective. Like, it gives you the ability to satisfy a very well-paying, let's say, customer in a quicker way than any other things with less possible side effects, let's say. I'm not saying other languages cannot do that. I'm not saying, but I'm saying the speed that allows you to do it.
You combine it with the sandbox option, and I mean,
yeah, of course.
Like you can try things in production in a safe environment. Mind-blowing.
Yeah, and I would say even let me add one more thing here, and I will stop about this. It even allows you to develop a new feature in a very complex environment that maybe you cannot simulate from the beginning to make a real TDD way of stuff in a way that you connect to the production. I'm not saying people should do that, but I'm just sharing here. Maybe you need it. So let's say you have a very complex environment of data in production that is very hard to, or maybe you are in a peak season, or in some ways it's very hard to have it locally, right? And someone asks you to do a change somewhere and you want to do it quicker. One way to understand what happens there is you can connect and inspect the data and even run some dry run code there to see how it behaves, and then be able to transform that in tests locally.
Now we have to put a disclaimer. Huh? We have to put a disclaimer to juniors, and as we were talking about them earlier, please do not do that, and let wait a few years before you do that.
I was sharing that, but I'm just saying, like, it allows you some extra things that it's harder to do them.
And
otherwise.
I think it's a nice way to circle back into what we were talking about Ruby in the beginning, which is if you want to do it, you can. And then it's a matter of you as a professional, whether or not you should be able to, you should do it yourself. Having the option, I feel like that's a common theme from the entire discussion, is having the option is what we love most about Ruby. The option to opt in or not with types, to use Rails, to write a method without parentheses, please put parentheses. But it's kind of stuff like that's the beauty of it.
And now that we've closed the circle, we've also hit, we're really close to the end of the podcast. And I like to finish the podcast by asking a similar question of each guest, which is, if there is someone that is junior to Ruby or hasn't discovered Ruby yet, and they want to get into it, where should they start?
Depends what's the expectation of this person. Is it like, I want to discover a new programming language, or is it I want to put something into production as soon as possible? Like, if I answer the second one for a bootcamp, Le Wagon's choice of having Ruby and Rails is top. Like, putting something into production, especially with Rails 8. I mean, I'm not proficient in Django or Phoenix or the other web-based framework for this kind of stuff, but I've seen it with Nest. Rails smokes it. It's insanely faster.
Let me go to the other side to have the both things. So from a technical perspective, here is what I will say. I will not say read show Ruby, but I will say the following. Knowing, just as an advice for a junior, knowing that Ruby, it's a pure OP, or as pure as possible OP language, and everything is an object. My invitation is just open IRB or a file, know that everything is an object and can be inspected, and just read a bit about the debug gem and just try to inspect stuff there. Just ask, what is this method, where is located, because you can another pretty how to say amazing power of Ruby is that it's very, you can do very nice how to say self-inspection, or you can inspect it very nice about what is happening. And I think that's a pretty nice way to discover the language, just being curious about, is this an object, what is the name of this object, where is this method defined in this object, or like in a hierarchy, and so on. And you can actually, even without reading the documentation, discover that yourself. If you you can open the Rails console if you want, but IRB in Ruby, have an object and start inspecting it. Yeah.
Great. I think that's a wrap. Thank you both so very much. It was a really, really, really interesting episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pablo.
Thank you.